right, so before lunch I tried to give you a little taste for what it might be like to be in one of these classes. And now what I do is just like to talk about important support mechanisms related to parents, and one is the check-in phone calls. And I hope you got the notion in the class that everything that we do is kind of brief. You know, we give brief information, and then we try something out, and then we give brief this. It's all kind of light touches. The same on the phone call. The check-in phone call is really important, and I emphasize this because most places I know that have introduced parenting programs, they learn about some great program, and then they try to deliver it in the school, and then nobody shows up, and it's really frustrating. And in a lot of the evidence-based studies I've seen related to prevention, you might have 30 or 40% of parents that showed up to at least one class, and that's it. And if that one class is really great and you've got Dr. Phil running it and everybody believes him, maybe it works. I don't know. But it's probably going to take more than that, if you really want to try to learn something new and try it out differently. So a key part of doing this is engaging parents. And one way to engage them in the material, and not just get them to show up, but really engage in the material, is to develop, to the best that you can do in a limited situation, a relationship between the person delivering the program and the parent. And so we try to do that with light touches, including phone calls and a couple introductions before the program starts. And then these check-in phone calls, it's just a quick touch-in for maybe 10 minutes. And the idea is to be very supportive and encouraging about whatever parents are trying. It's up to them to try whatever they want, but we do try to guide or give suggestions for what you can try out. And so we do have these little homework things, and you can see one of them in that packet that we were looking through before. But the idea is to touch base with them, ask how it's going, and then encourage them to come to the next meeting. And very simple, quick, and easy. The idea is not to become a counselor or a therapist. It's just to be a support person and a person that you'd feel comfortable talking to more. Some parents on those phone calls will say, well, I tried it, but it's not working very well. So then what we try to do is get the parent to describe specifically what they did and what didn't work. The key part of all these skills is being specific. And so we'll talk to them about, okay, what behavior was your kid doing that you were trying to do something around? What did you try so far? How did it work? And then we'll give them a few suggestions about things they might try, and we always try to refer back to what we talked about in class. The video, do you remember in the video when that kid was making faces at his mom when they were talking about timeout? Do you remember what the parent did? Did that happen with you? Whatever. Sometimes parents say they didn't try, and often something that they'll say is that, well, I didn't try that because you said it's really important to be consistent, and I was worried if I tried that, but I know I can't do it after that I just can't start it, So they're trying to say, I want to be consistent, but I don't feel like I can be, so I don't even want to start at all, And so then we say, it's really wonderful that you're so sensitive to that and that you want to be consistent, and that's something that you want to do, and we know that's a really hard thing to do. But maybe if you just think about trying something little, it might start. Could you try this? It's a sales job, kind of like the used car salesman kind of thing. But I think we might try this. What is it going to take to get you in this car today? But it's tried out a parenting skill. Something small. Try it out, and if you can get them to commit, we ask the person, the instructor, to write down a little note so they'll remember. Well, here's what Mr. Smith talked to me about, and what I'd like to, and then you review that before you go back to class, and so they can say, hey, how did that go? Did you get a chance to try it out? So there's a lot of, we don't try to engage families in long conversations because there's not enough time to do that in prevention programs, and this is not a clinical program, but those little touches are very important. A second part of this parent-directed component is school-home communication. And so this involves a number of things. One is, first of all, establishing that this program is going to take place at the school. It's part of the school. and the school principal is interested, and the teachers are interested, and hopefully that's true, and it works better if they are, if everybody's engaged in part of the program. But we have multiple letters and phone calls and reminders that go out before to say, hey, come to your kid's school and learn about this. We'll have the LIFT program in your kid's classroom. You know, have you been to the classroom lately? You know, and the teacher might be there the first night, and so there's kind of a sense that, hey, they're doing this. This is part of the school. Now, whether that works well or not depends, of course, on the relationship of the family to the school or the community to the school. And so in some communities, there's a really bad history between the community and the school. And if that's the case, you wouldn't want to do this program until you did some work on trying to deal with that issue, you know. But anyway, once the program gets going, we send a weekly newsletter home with the child. As many of you know, putting a newsletter in a kid's backpack is not necessarily the best way to get information back to parents because it may never get there. But in these days, before there was other alternatives, we tried it out, and at least there's a chance that maybe parents might see information about LIFT. But we tell them in the classes and on the phone, there'll be some information coming home, check your kid's backpack. And then we do something called the LIFT line. And I know this is a little dated because this study was done in the early 90s. But before cell phones and before most of us had cell phones and before the internet, there were answering machines that you may have had in your house and landline phones, right? So what we did, and this, believe it or not, was somewhat novel in the Oregon schools at the time, is we actually put a landline phone in every classroom. And we put an answering machine in every classroom. And this wasn't true in the schools we were working with. There was one phone usually in the front office. And somebody would call and then they'd put it out over the intercom. So we put a direct phone line and an answering machine in each class. And what we did is we asked teachers to leave new messages each week on the answering machine to highlight what was going on in the class, any special activities, homework, notable issues. And then we invited parents to call the LIFT line, learn what's going on in your kid's class for the week. And if you have a message that you'd like to give the teacher, leave it on the answering machine. And so the idea here was just to provide one more opportunity that was a pretty low-key opportunity for parents and teachers to communicate, because there's no threat here that if somebody calls on the phone, the teacher doesn't have to pick it up. A parent may be angry on the phone, but it's on the answering machine, and so you have time to think through it and think about it. So this was kind of a thing that actually was quite popular amongst parents and teachers because it did provide a way to increase communication, but it didn't force you into a situation. It just was, And for angry calls that did come over, at least the teacher could think about it a little bit. They might talk with their colleagues, what should I do? There was like a prep time before you called the parent back. So, going back to the theory of action here, remember the idea here in LIFT is to try to help people think about starting simple little behaviors that are possible to do, and that when you do them, they increase the chance that the people around you will also do simple behaviors more, and that all of you will have more positive thoughts and hopefully more positive feelings about each other. So let's go back to our little kid in the store. So, but what that video does illustrate well is that, when we are parents and when we're kids, there are times in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year when things are really intense and things feel out of control and things aren't going very well. And for families where this has happened a lot, you end up with this history of being defeated over and over as a parent and feeling very sad and ineffectual when you have a kid that's really harder to deal with, especially if you don't have support. So if you're a single parent or the relationship that you're in isn't very supportive and you're the primary caregiver and you're out there on the front line and it's not working for you, And so for families who either have kids that are particularly challenging or they've been in contexts that are very challenging and it's been hard to do what you need to do to be a parent and raise your kid in the way that you want to do, you often show up if you show up at a therapist, which is unlikely, this history of 10,000 defeats, which includes not only kind of this body of negative emotion that you feel about your family, but it also includes the story that you've created about your family, about why this is happening. And when you come into therapy, if you do that, and a lot of people don't have access to therapy, and a lot of people walk into the door of a therapist who doesn't really know how to deal with these situations, and that's not the right place for them to be, you have this body of negative emotion and this story that's somewhat impenetrable, and all of that goes into to creating a resistance to change. Even though you want to change, you feel like it's not possible. And so one thing that we did at OSLC was a series of studies on looking at this issue of parental resistance to change. And because we're more behaviorally inclined and we like to count things like the count on Sesame Street, like we count how many times people say things. And so what we were doing was counting the number of times people say I won't, or I can't, or they don't do their homework, And how many times you do this is related to how long you've been having problems going on, but also parent pathology, including being depressed, or maybe a parent that is more involved themselves in antisocial kind of behaviors, or a parent that has high stress. Social disadvantage is also predictive of this because it's related to this. People who are in very difficult circumstances are dealing with all kinds of difficult things all day, and any of us put in those situations would find it hard to be good parents. And so this is true of many families that are farther down the line. And I put this up because I want to emphasize we're talking here about working with families that haven't gotten to this point yet. Or if they have gotten to that point, they're willing to come to these kind of groups. And then in those cases, what I see as a group like this is ideal if a parent can go to that and have a good experience and think, well, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to go talk to somebody else some more. Maybe this is okay. Because for a lot of these families, it's like, first of all, there's either nothing available, but there is. It's hard to think about yourself walking in the door and sitting there and talking to somebody that's supposed to help you, and how does this work? Here's our little guy that kind of looks like the little prince there on the table. So again, we've been talking about the home component. Now we're going to talk about the child-directed components, which involve work in the classroom and work on the playground. And we already talked a little bit about the communication component, which involved the lift line and the newsletters and things like that. So I will show you a clip here.
Kids took center stage at the state capitol today, showing off how an early violence prevention program is working at their school. Captain Stevens takes us to Clear Lake Elementary, where social skills and positive problem solving is part of what's being taught.
Back from a field trip at the state capitol, we invited demonstrators at Clear Lake Elementary to have sharing and problem solving time.
You could not argue back, so what could you do?
Like go tell a teacher?
Okay, go tell a teacher. Stand up, Stephanie.
It's part of the LIFT program, heading off behavior problems using social skills learning, parent training, and incentives. At Clear Lake, they took a look at where most of their behavior problems were happening, and you might be surprised to learn that most of them were right here on the playground.
And it's gotten better for the program? Like 1 or 2 kids. And one kid, well, he used to be a bully, and then he stopped being a bully. And then he started being nice.
Hey, you're doing a good job playing together. It's a pretty simple concept. Play nice, and you're rewarded with armbands.
Here, I like the way you're playing by the rules. Thanks. Good job sharing.
Those armbands go into the classroom kitty, and when it's full, there are extras for that good behavior.
Sometimes they have popcorn parties. It's those kinds of things. And it's really been making a difference and making it much more fun, much more cooperative, and much safer out there.
Program organizers say it's also decreased acting out in the classroom and improved relationships at home. We're going to decide if
I do this solution, then what's going to happen?
Catherine Stevens, Northwest News.
This is the second year of the pilot program at Clear Lake Elementary.
Which is the problem with these studies, right? Is you do a study and then it goes away. So we were talking about that at lunch. So, so this was made maybe 6 years after that initial video was made. So we're moving now up in the 90s a bit. And we had established this program, and we still had Margaret working with us. This particular school actually is located in a neighborhood that's low income, where there are a lot of people out of work because of lumber mills shutting down. And it's actually a pretty tough neighborhood. You can really tell that from the video, but it's true. The child social skills and problem-solving training is the first part of the child-directed component. And this also is group-based. It's done in the classroom. It lasts for about 10 weeks. It lasts for 10 weeks. Every week, the first session of the week is focused on introducing a new idea to kids, a new thing to practice that week. And the second session that week is a class meeting and a problem-solving session. And we have a very simple few simple steps of how to talk about problems that we use in the classroom, that we put up posters around the school. And and we train everybody in the school, the janitor, the cafeteria workers, everybody, to think about this, using this problem-solving approach if it comes up. And so whether it happens or not is variable, but the idea is to try to get everybody thinking on the same page. The session process is very much like the process for the parent training, very brief lectures, small group, circle time kind of activities, larger group activities with the whole class, using role-playing and discussion, same kind of thing. The content for the first graders, the first week we focus on rules and what makes a good rule and what makes not a good rule. And then we talk about listening to each other, identifying feelings, etc. So these types of topics are what you see in social emotional learning classes. One thing that might be interesting to you is, I don't know to the extent that second step is used down here, but some of the authors of this program for the parenting component are the same that worked on the second step program. I don't know if that's familiar to you, but anyway, it's all common base. A lot of this stuff is developed by similar folks, but this content in this child-directed component is similar to that in other social skills programs. The fifth grade is a little bit different. It focuses a little bit more on groups and problem solving and dealing with anger and things like that. So what I'd like to do now is just walk through a session. It's from the grade 1 program. It's lesson 15. And the first thing that you'll notice about this session is that it's very brief. This is not a huge, heavy curriculum, you know. So if everybody can pull that up. The way that we did the LIFT program in this study, and it doesn't have to be done this way, but we did have instructors that were hired under our research grant to come into the classroom, and we did make it something where the teacher was contributing, but the LIFT program itself was taught by someone who came in from the outside. So in typical practice, it could be a school employee, or it could be somebody from an outside nonprofit. One thing that we tried later on was a little experiment where we got a little grant money, and we bought out the time with a school counselor in the school to actually do prevention work, because it's hard to have enough time when you're a school counselor to do that work. And so we bought out half of her job and taught her how to use LIFT, and then had her work closely with a consultant from our work, and together they did LIFT. And so we did that actually later on in Clear Lake, and I think the neat thing is that things went well enough with the families and with the school that when we pulled the grant out, the school decided to keep the program going, and they figured out how to fund it. And it just took some creativity, but that was a success. I thought that, okay, we helped get it going, and then we left, and it stayed. And however, it didn't stay forever. because eventually, if you're a school counselor working in a difficult environment, you get overwhelmed by all the individual issues that kids and families have. And I know the longer it went, the more that happened. And I think it lasted 4 or 5 years and then stopped. So keeping prevention activities going in the school is always a challenge. And you need champions at the principal level, the district level, and the teacher level to keep it going. So we'll talk more about that later. So anyway, in this program, in this particular lesson, dealing with teasing and criticism for the first graders, there's a brief introduction, and then we do a lot of role plays with the first graders, just using puppets because it's kind of silly and people like it, and we just, the kids like it, they enjoy that, and they're used to seeing that if they've watched Sesame Street and other shows on TV. So we use puppets to illustrate, kids teasing each other and then how they might handle it differently. So that's talked about here. And one thing that we talk about that's popular in a lot of programs is this notion of the turtle trick. Some of you may know this. And so here's a turtle. You'll have that handout. And then we talk about one way to help calm yourself down is when someone's bothering you is to think about yourself as a turtle in your mind, not physically to go like that, but think about in your mind that you have a safe shell, and that's you have a safe shell inside of you, and you can retreat into that when somebody is teasing you. And you don't have to, you can be a turtle like this and just pull out and leave the situation rather than have to stay there. So again, when you're in a situation with 6-year-olds, this can be helpful. It's not necessarily helpful later on, but when you've got little kids, it can be. And even later on in more difficult circumstances, being able to think about yourself being in a shell when you're facing this tough situation and finding a way to get out of that situation is generally a lot more safe for you than it is to get in a fight with somebody about that issue. So it's just an example of a very simple kind of thing that we can do. So we talk with kids about what would it take for you to retreat in your shell if a kid was there teasing you or criticizing you. What would you do? And so there's no answer to that. It's something that everybody has to figure out on their own. And so we talk in the group about that. We talk about kids, ask kids to visualize and imagine that you were in a situation like this. What would you do? Share that idea, talk about it, and help people learn from others. So that's something we do a lot with parents too. I mean, the wisdom is out there, right? You just got to get people to talk about it. And we have some wisdom that we can share from our own experience or from the research that we've done, but we're not the experts about kids. We're not the experts about families. You're the expert on your own family. We can tell you what's worked with our family or what's worked in our research. And maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't. So we take that same approach with the kids, but this kind of approach rather than a program feeling like we have all the answers, it's not true. So we don't act that way. So then, as you go through this session, we break up into groups, and kids try out the turtle trick in the group, and the group leader kind of modifies things, what's going on, and then we bring everybody back together and talk about what happened in the groups. And then, with every session that we have, we review rules on the playground, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later. And then the kids go out onto the playground for a free play time. And during the free play time is when we use the playground behavior game. You saw a little clip of it there with Margaret going around and handing out little nylon armbands. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's another little simple procedure that we use. So the playground behavior game. So this is tied to the training sessions. One of the biggest problems on playgrounds is that if you even have a playground, is that there are too few adults out there to really monitor what's going on. So in Oregon, it's pretty typical at my kids' school, for example. I've had kids in elementary school for 17 years. We finally graduated last year from our elementary school, so it's weird to not be there anymore. But anyway, on that playground, it's typical to go out there and there would be one adult that was like on playground duty, and then maybe a volunteer, but maybe not, and then like 150 kids running around. And so what happens is that if a kid gets in a fight or if something's going on, there's no way you're going to pick it up until it's blatant and it's going on. You just can't do it, you know. And so what we do is we, in this program, is that we figured out a way to fund having additional non-contract staff out there to help on the playground, and also if there were parent volunteers that in the school that were willing to do this, and we provided them training on how to do this playground behavior game. And the biggest task of the adult on the playground is just to walk and to move, because your presence changes the context of the playground. So you just move around and you pay attention to two things: behavior you want to see, good behavior, and behavior that you don't want to see, negative behavior. And the idea is the adult has a little fanny pack that has a lot of these little nylon, little colorful things that you can put on like this, really lightweight, cheap things. And if you see a kid doing something good, you say, hey, I really liked the way that you did such and such, and you give them a little armband. And then you walk around and you say, oh, I really like how you did that. Or really, so it's just, you just label it and give them a little armband. And if you see a kid doing something negative, if it's a really low-level negative thing, you just move on. If it's a serious negative thing, then you tell somebody on the person on the playground who's designated to deal with the serious negative things, which is just one person, usually, unless you need more. And that person handles that, but you keep moving. So you don't let everybody get distracted by the negatives. But you go around, and by giving acknowledgement of the positives, it's interesting that you really can bring down negativity on the playground. And I think it's just that kids are different when adults are around, and you're labeling the good stuff, and kids respond to that. 6-year-olds respond to that, you know. And so then when you get done with that period, as you see, if that lasts like 15 minutes, then you come in, and then the lift instructor gets back with the kids in a circle, talks about how did it go today, and debriefs it. So I think we'll, oops, what did I do there? So I think this clip is really similar to the other clip in terms of showing the handing out of the armbands. But what I'd like you to do now is pick up this handout, which says Lift, the Playground Behavior Game. And I'd just like to give you some more information about how this playground behavior game works. And I'll just walk you through this. So you know, the goal of this is to move around the playground, notice the positive behaviors of children, and give them the message repeatedly that the specific ways that they interact with other children is important. It's so important that we as adults want to be out there and see it. And when we see them do things that we want, we'll acknowledge it and then give them this little armband, which I'll talk about what you do with that in a minute. And a simple behavior like this on a playground really can increase positive behaviors quite dramatically and decrease negative behaviors. And it's kind of amazing, actually, how well it can work. So the overview is that for positive behavior, children earn these little nylon bracelets for when they display positive behaviors. And when children come in from recess, they put these little things in a jar, and when the jar gets all the way filled up, then the class gets a reward together, like an extra recess. Very simple. For the negative behaviors, we break the class up into groups of 4 or 5 kids, and the idea is to use group influence to try to decrease negative behaviors. So at the beginning of each class, each group has said, okay, red group, you have 20 points today, and if you don't do any negative behaviors, and we talk about what those might be, like fighting and pushing and arguing or whatever you want to focus on in that day, you'll have all your points. But if you lose a certain number of points today, then you won't get a reward on this particular chart that we keep for the groups. And it becomes a competition where the groups want to get a star up on this chart. And when the chart is all filled up, you get a reward at the end. So it's kind of this silly thing of providing rewards for little simple behaviors that people should be doing anyway. And in fact, that's the hard thing for this kind of reward system for a lot of adults is, kids should do this. They shouldn't need to be rewarded for this. It's not about the rewards. It's about calling attention to the issue. That's what it's about. And it's providing an artificial way to help kids who don't know how to act guidance so that they do know how to act. And the funny thing about it is that in some areas of our lives in the United States, we do this all the time. Like if you're training a person to play soccer, and you're coaching a kid that's 4 years old how to play soccer, you practice with them over and over again foot skills, over and over and over again, so that when they get to be older, they will be good soccer players. You start with foot skills, and you teach them how to get a sense of the field and space and all this stuff. And for sports in this country, we do this really well, and it's all about encouraging and rewarding, and kids get out there and they play well and they win the game, And so, but for some reason about social behaviors like this that everybody should just be expected to do, we get harder about that, But it's really the same idea. It's like, how do you teach somebody skills that they need to know? And so when you teach skills this way, there's a lot of kids in the classroom that already know this, and they don't really need this. But this is for the kids who don't know it, but haven't gone over the edge yet. And it's a lot. We've found that one way to get to those kids is by doing a program that applies to everybody, and it's certainly not harmful to the kids who already know how to do this. It's just helping the kids that don't know how to do it. So anyway. So there's the materials that you would need to do this game, and then you go to page 2. And the key part about this is providing playground supervisors with a little bit of training and then support throughout so that they keep moving. Because the hardest thing with playground supervisors is that they're not used to moving, and they're used to talking to people. They'll talk to kids, one kid at a time that comes up to them, or they'll talk to an adult on the playground. Oh, how are you doing? And we say, this is not, being a playground supervisor is not about talking. It's about moving and paying attention and recognizing. So, so the supervisors are the ones that need to distribute the armbands and also keep track of negative behavior. So for the positive behaviors, examples of positive behaviors that we train supervisors to attend to are kids that have followed directions that are given by them by somebody, or if they're following the rules of a game, or if they're playing properly on the playground equipment, or they're playing nicely with peers or whatever. Those are the kind of things that we respond to. And obviously we can't give armbands every time we see one of those things. So it's an intermittent reinforcement, or you just hit what you can. But by moving around across the program, every kid should get multiple armbands. So then we teach supervisors how to be specific in terms of saying, oh, I really liked how you did whatever. That's, Aaron, that was a great job following the rules. You really know how to play basketball or whatever, that type of comment. So then when children come to the class after recess, they put the armbands into the classroom jar. When the jar is full, all children in the class receive a predetermined award. This may be a group award such as an extra recess or individual rewards. So that's the positive part of this. For the negative behavior part, again, we put the kids into groups. Each supervisor has a little clipboard, and if they do see, Mark do something that is negative but wasn't really severe, so it's not going to require some big response, they'll just put a little mark on their sheet. That's it, and then they move on. If it's something that requires a correction, they'll do that, but most of the time, the focus here is on the positives, and unless there's a serious kind of situation. But some negative behaviors that we teach people to attend to are little things like not following directions, or a little bit bigger things like teasing, or more serious things like arguing and name calling. And unlike other programs that may spend a lot of time defining these things and paying a lot of attention to exactly how to define these things, that's not what we're into here. We're just trying to help the supervisors get a general sense for the good things they're looking for and the bad things that they don't want to see happen. And then at the end of the recess, one of the supervisors collects all of the sheets that everybody did, figures out whether each group in the class got saved their points and didn't do negative things. And if like the red group did have 19 points at the end, and the goal for the day was to have 16 points at the end of the class. Then we give them a little red sticker, and we acknowledge the red group for their good behavior. So that's what we do, and that program is the one that decreased, that part of the program component in the context of these other programs really did decrease significantly the more negative behaviors of kids on the playground. You'd think it would be most successful with the 6-year-olds because it seems more kind of like the game that would be appropriate for that age group more, but believe it or not, the impact on the 5th graders was the same as on the 6-year-olds. So kids respond to attention from adults. They just do, and they especially respond to positive attention from adults. This is a very simple way to do that. All right, so what I'd like to do during this last period is kind of give you some ideas of putting it all together, and then talk a little bit about how this might be helpful, how some ideas here might be helpful in your own work that you're doing. So we've talked now about a little bit about the home component, and I've tried to illustrate some of that. We've talked a little bit about the playground in the classroom, and I've tried to illustrate that a little bit and give you a sense for what that's like, and then we talked about tying it all together. But making programs like this work can be very challenging, and in fact, sometimes it can feel like this little video clip I'm going to show you. I don't know about you guys, but you know, it feels that way sometimes when you're out there, right?
Yes.
Yes. Particularly around prevention, because if there's something that that you almost never get to in service delivery, it's prevention. You know, there's never enough money for intervening when there's problems. And so therefore, there's almost never enough money for prevention. And when prevention efforts are done, they're often very piecemeal. So you might get there might be the program of the month arrives, and you try it out, and then it ends up on the shelf. And then a few years later, somebody comes in with a new idea, and you try it out, and it goes back on the shelf. And this is kind of the story of prevention in this country, I think. And it's very difficult. So what I'd like to do is just talk about some final little issues around LIFT that are important to know, and then I'd like to talk about and have you all talk together and alone, and then in the group about prevention in the context that you're working in right now. So, who are the instructors in the LIFT program? Over the 40 years of work that we've done at OSLC with intervention and prevention, we've found that people can be great instructors for programs like this from all walks of life, from all education levels. It doesn't matter whether you have a PhD or a master's degree or you didn't graduate from high school. It does not matter to be good at a program like this. And in fact, sometimes having more education is more problematic because you challenge everything you don't get with the program. You've got your own ideas. You know, not that we all don't have our own ideas, but for people who are used to spending most of their life not liking other people's ideas and only liking their ideas, it can be a little bit challenging. So unless you manage that well, it takes more supervision. Experience with children and parents is a must. It doesn't mean that you've had to be a parent, but certainly if you have a parent and can draw on your own experiences as a parent or an uncle or an aunt or a caregiver for a child, it's very helpful. Being engaging and attentive and really getting somebody who enjoys working with people is very important. And ideally, the person has been in front of parents before and worked with them, not necessarily with this kind of model, but a key thing is that somebody is really open to thinking about new models. I mean, sometimes, we've made hires of people who seemed pretty good and met most of these criteria, but they really did have a model they fundamentally believed in that was different than this model. They didn't like the behavioral approach, and they didn't like this or they didn't like that. or they had a hard, they were working in a situation where they really kind of had a hard time believing in people, because you have to be working with parents and really believe in them, and they have to know that you believe in them, no matter what situation they're from, no matter what circumstances they're dealing with, and no matter what their kids are like. The idea here is that parents are with you, and that you believe in what they can do, and that you are not the expert. You're just here to provide some ideas and be supportive, and that's your role. And in a sense, the idea for this person is to model fundamental things that are important as a parent, because ultimately that's what we are as parents, right? Ultimately we should be role models for our kids. We should do our best to help set them on a good path, and ultimately we have to watch them be on that path. And that's what we do, In fact, I've found parenting, as my kids go into adulthood, it's so much more challenging than when they were younger, because no longer can you can't script everything out anymore, right? You don't have as much control when they're 6, and you can help them when they get hurt, and you can encourage them when they do something great, and now I can encourage them when they do something great, and I can listen to them and help them, but it's a lot more emotionally difficult, because you can't, they're not, many of them have moved around the country. It's hard. Anyway, instructors, I think the main point here is that being a good person in a preventionist role is finding someone who really, wants to engage with parents and is willing to work together in a group and share information. And it's not about education level. The training that we used in this study is that we provided the instructors a background to where we were thinking and how we got to where we thought about this intervention, which I tried to give you a taste of today. And then we gave them just basic skills that they needed for the sessions: how to do the playground behavior game, how to do the parent phone calls, how to interact with teachers and school staff about the program. And we did a lot of role playing and practicing. But really what doing prevention like this is about is not having somebody that created the program like me drop in for 3 days and talk about the program and then go away. It's about developing a community within a school that's supportive of the program and having the school make it their own, so that you have the materials available, but it's really about developing a community of support. And there needs to be a point person in the school. It could be the school counselor, it could be somebody hired from the outside, who's coordinating that community and providing support and supervision. But without that, you can't do it. So you could give this program to teachers and ask them to do it, but they have a ton of other things to do, and unless there's kind of a guiding person to keep it all together, it's not going to happen. In the training, we practice key parts of each session multiple times. We practice leading discussion activities. Ideally, you have kind of an apprenticeship system where you had 2 people get to teach together, a more senior person and somebody that's new. That would be ideal. But it's just, training in a program like this, which really, if you look at the materials, it's not very complicated if you come to it with some knowledge of working with kids and families. But what is complicated is doing it similarly across instructors and getting kind of a common point of view about how you do this. But it's not just about a one-shot training, it's ongoing support from somebody in the school. So supervision is absolutely key, and obviously the ideal would be to have a supervisor who'd done this program before and really understood it in and out. But that's not necessarily necessary, because this program has a lot of things in common with other kinds of prevention or intervention programs. But what we did during our study was we had weekly team meetings, weekly individual meetings between the supervisor and the person, the instructors, which may have lasted 10 minutes or sometimes on the phone. And then the supervisor, the person that's kind of coordinating in the school, is a presence, just like the supervisors are a presence on the playground. So they visit classes, they're around, they're easy to access. But really, I think doing these evidence-based programs in a school setting like this does require a supervisor who is very present and very supportive and very interactive. And I don't think that you can do a program like this unless that's the case. And I think that I think it's a skill. You need to be a skilled person to do that. So this is where you really need a skilled supervisor. But again, I don't think the quality of supervision depends on that person being somebody who went to school for a long time. It's somebody who needs to understand what they're supposed to do, which is pay attention to people, provide support, provide guidance. I mean, it's basically what we've been talking about today around what parents need to do with kids. You know, you need to be present. So a key issue that doesn't happen in these kind of evidence-based programs, but if this doesn't happen, I don't see these programs as very valuable because they're just not going to get out to many families, is that if you choose, the classroom-based program and the school-based program works pretty well if you have a group of students who show up to class and come. If the kids that are in your school come most of the time, then you can do this. But with the parents, regardless of what the school is like, it's hard to get parents to show up to parenting classes. Everybody's busy and they may be working multiple jobs or they may just be busy for other reasons or whatever. Sports gets in the way, all kinds of other things get in the way. So what we did, because if we just offered the parenting program like one group a week, which is often what happens like in a school, like they might say, okay, we've got a parenting program at the school for the next couple of weeks, and somebody comes in for one night and offers it. And what we did is that we offered this program multiple times during the week at different times of the day. So there'd be one early in the day, there would be one after school, there would be later in the evening on multiple different days. And if a family didn't show up on Monday, we'd say, hey, you know what? We've got 5 other times this week. Do you think you might be able to come to one of those times? If parents didn't show up, we would say, hey, we could come to your house and talk to you a little bit. We've got some materials to share. Could I come over for a half an hour and I'll leave a copy of the videotape we looked at? You know? If that didn't work, we'd get them on the phone and say, hey, could I talk to you for the next 15 minutes about what we talked about this week? And then I'll send you something in the mail or I can drop it off at your house. So this sounds like a very impractical thing to do, but frankly, I think to get these programs to work, if they're group-based at the parent level and they're intended to be prevention, you have to get out into the community and you have to provide opportunities for parents to get the information. Otherwise, just offering a class, you're just not going to get people to show up. So we did this, and we went from, if we would have just offered a group, a 6-session group to parents, for example, and that's it, and wouldn't have done all these things, I would have predicted we've got about maybe 15 or 20% of people to come to like 5 of the 6 sessions. When we did do the multiple times per week thing, we got about 25% of people to show up. When we added in the home visits and the phone calls, we got 93% of people to get the information somehow. Why is that? Well, it's using the same principles as the rest of this program. We continually were attending to the fact that it's really important and we care about you and we'd like you to come. And we have, so it's just the simple idea of attending and supporting and paying attention and not giving up. And if you do that, you can get this information out to people. Will they use it? That's a different story, But if you really want to deliver these programs to families in real life situations, you can't just offer one group a week and expect they're going to come. Other 3 issues that we dealt with here is that, transportation, talking to the local transit system and see if they'd be willing to provide support or other kinds of means like that where you might get help. We do tend to provide food and free childcare at these classes, because that's another thing. So if you do all of this stuff together, you really can get parents to show up if what you're offering is valuable and engaging. And this program may not be it. It may be something else. But if you offer a program for parents, they're not going to come unless you do something like that. So this is absolutely crucial, and it was crucial in this study, and it's been crucial in my own practice life that there needs to be multiple ways to do this. And I think that's a misnomer about these evidence-based programs, is that it's like you buy a package and you train somebody for 3 days and then you just do it and people are going to come, and it just doesn't happen that way. So there's 3 other issues that I'd like to talk about: the school climate, the culture, and then some other practical issues and discussion for your own life and your own practice. So first of all, school climate. So first of all, this program, I think, was successful in this study because we did have people who really liked these ideas, and we worked with them on thinking through these ideas at the district level, at the school principal level, at the teacher level, and the school counselor level, and school staff. So that there was, in each school, there was at least somebody in the school that thought maybe this could be helpful. And each of those players played a very important role in getting some enthusiasm and keeping it going, And it's not, unless you've got champions all the way up and down who are going to be supportive of this kind of program, I don't think you can make it work. So, another thing that's really helpful is if there's already some kind of structure in the school that would be supportive of bringing something like this in. And so this is just an example of a program that I know about, but there's others called PBIS, and some of you may know about that, but it's called Positive Behavior Intervention Supports. And what you do in this program is they work within a school to establish school-wide rules, to think about how the school, the teachers and the principal and everybody together can promote a set of positive values and behaviors about how everybody in the school treats each other, to recognize and reward students, and then use data to adjust the program. And so this is something, there's a lot of information about this on the web, lots and lots of materials. And so if you're interested, this might be something to read about PBIS. This is an example of one of the information system programs that they use in PBIS, which is called SWIS, a school-wide information system. But one thing they're really interested in is tracking closely what types of problem behaviors are occurring via using data from office discipline referrals. And they set up a data set and through this program where you can, like, this is a count of the frequency of different problem behaviors. So in this particular school, inappropriate language and disrespect were the highest frequency events. This is aggression and fighting, harassment, etc. And but in this system, you can graph out like what times of days do these behaviors occur, where do they occur, and all this stuff. So the school has to work together on a way to, first of all, classify all these problem behaviors, and then how to work together to write up these office discipline referrals in a different way than is normally done. But having this kind of structure is really helpful, and it's much easier to insert something like LIFT into a school that has this as a backdrop. But there are a couple of randomized control trials that have been done on PBIS now, and I could get you those studies if you'd like. But anyway, they have seen in these studies where they've compared schools that have PBIS versus schools that don't, decreases in discipline problems, increases in academic achievement, and then some increases on how students and teachers are feeling about the school. So this might be something interesting to look at because I think the school climate is extremely important. Another issue is culture. I really wanted to give you a sense today of the culture that this program came out of, and it may be very different, and probably is very different than the cultures that you're working with here in Miami. And that's true in schools that we work in Oregon too. And so our way of working around the issue of culture, or working with the issue of culture, is that if there's a new group that enters our schools that a program like this is just not going to work for, we over the years have tried to develop relationships with the people that are the new folks that are coming to our community and figure out what can we do differently. So a program that we developed, Nuestros Familias, is a program that we created in close collaboration with the largest nonprofit in Eugene that works with Latino immigrants. And in Oregon, as I mentioned earlier, Oregon is an emerging immigrant state. There's always been Mexican immigrants that were coming up and down from Mexico to California to Oregon and back and forth. And as time has gone on, that flow has changed. And but in the early 90s, actually, after this study was first done, there started to be people that were settling more in Oregon, and so we've had a dramatic increase in the number of Latino families in our state and in our school system. And so in response to that, our goal was to serve our community. And so we worked for about 2 years to look at all the intervention program materials that we had developed over the years and think about them in the context of Latino families that were coming to our state and what may or might not be useful. So what we did is we got together a team of Latino interventionists, bicultural, bilingual interventionists who were working with families through this nonprofit that we were working with. And we came up with a technique where we created what's kind of an idealized case, a fictional case, and how would that family respond if they were presented with this material. And we worked all the way through our material and kind of came up with ideas about what might work, what won't work, what other kinds of issues do we need to talk about. And the program that we came up with emphasizes families as the most important teachers that kids will ever have, that there are challenges that Latino families are facing in Oregon that are unique to Oregon being a state that hasn't had many Latino families prior, and that it's difficult to raise children successfully within this environment that they're moving into. But and that there are many protective factors in the culture of the Mexican families coming to live in Oregon that get disrupted because they're not living in their communities in Mexico anymore. They're now in the United States and Oregon. So anyway, the basic idea in this program is that the social cultural context that these immigrant families is entering puts challenges on the family environment and has impacts on educational and behavioral health outcomes for children. And so our idea was to find ways where we might give families ideas about how they might buffer the effects of this new social cultural context to improve these outcomes for their kids. The program that we created was based on LIFT and other related evidence-based programs, but it was significantly modified in a variety of ways. But it's a strength-based program. The idea is around empowering families to work in this new environment together. But it uses some of the same kind of ideas that we talked about here, but it's a little bit longer program. And the therapist is seen as a guide, as a coach, but not as an expert. This is the topics for the curriculum, and all of these were modified in a variety of ways or added. There's about 4 or 5 sessions here that don't appear in LIFT or some of our other programs. And we talk about the issues that happen with immigrant families, like children acculturating much quicker than parents, and kind of finding yourself going opposite ways, and the language issues that come up. And so the families that we worked with in this study are all Spanish-speaking families, relatively recent immigrants. And we're on the second study of this now, so we've done 2 randomized trials, and we're just wrapping up the second. And what we found in two randomized trials now is that parents who received this program versus those who didn't, we did find positive effects on a variety of areas for parents, which I showed earlier, these depression, marital stress, etc. We found impacts on parenting behaviors, helping kids with homework engagement, being more involved in homework, encouraging, etc. And then we found some impacts on youth. So it's promising, but my feeling is, your typical evidence-based program is coming from the background that I talked about. It's not coming from the reality of families in different situations. And so my feeling so far in the adaptation work that we've done is that there are core things in these programs that can be helpful, but exactly what they are depends on the family context that the families are working in. And so this kind of adaptation process is really important.